In the land of Nehekara, its sun-scorched sands stretch on for miles, a dry and desolate place in which only the most hardy survive. For on this figurative golden sea there is an abundance of wealth hidden beneath its surface. Many treasure hunters have travelled here in search of its riches and what it beholds, but those who are brave enough to venture into these wastes may forget. It won't always be the heat that kills you. The Tomb Kings, an ancient empire that once spanned across the deserts of Nehekara. The once noble families of the dynasties that ruled the empire are now nothing more than bleached bone and rotting flesh, as they are cursed with the gift of immortality. What was a race that has been left under the sands and forgotten to time, have been awoken by a spell that has given them an afterlife, but not the paradise they were promised. If you like what you're seeing on this channel, a subscription would be greatly appreciated. The channel is almost at 700 subscribers and we are growing daily, and by subscribing not only will you be getting the content that you love, you will also be helping me out personally. This subject is going to be split into two parts. In this first part I shall be discussing the Tomb Kings' history, from the first king whose decree has caused a catalyst for the fantasy world, to the awakening of the undead legions. This shall be a brief but informative video giving you all you need to know about the history of the Tomb Kings. The second video, however, will be talking about the Tomb Kings in detail, giving you specifics into how the kings rule, what the Cult of the Dead does, and the units that are utilised on the battlefield. But for now, let's take a deep dive into the history of the Tomb Kings. Deep beneath the sands of Nehekara, ancient civilizations lay in ruins. There's naught left but bleached bones and ancient scripts. At least, that's what it would seem to the untrained eye. For in reality, not everything underneath the sands may be dead, and what was once a mighty empire that fell may be rising again to claim its dominion. For even death could not stop the Tomb Kings. However, to understand how they became these dishevelled bodies, you first need to understand their history, and so as such, we need to travel back in time, roughly 2,500 years before the empire that was claimed by Sigmar Heldenhammer. In this ancient world, humanity was mainly comprised of barbarian savages, but in these deserts, humanity banded together. This veritable oasis of civilization became known as the Nehekaran Empire. Majestic art and architecture could be seen throughout all of its cities, from its palaces that royalty lived in, to its gargantuan statues that littered the empire. You could see the art and majesty on every street corner, especially in Khemri, the capital city of the empire. Khemri was one of, if not the first major man-made civilization, and with its dominion being controlled by the kings of the empire, its wealth was staggeringly high. However, even with all the wealth in the world, the kings always want more. These kings expanded the empire's borders tenfold, but eventually it led to a time of strife which greatly impacted the empire heavily. During this time, many enemies of the empire decided to take advantage of this fact. Green-skinned hordes and beasts of the southern jungles descended upon the cities, wreaking havoc. And during this time, many kings rose and fell. The time of strife didn't come to an end until one very particular man came into power. Settra was ruthless. Being an extremely tyrannical king, he killed many. This included his own children. However, even though he was ruthless, he had his motives. Settra believed that the best way to reorganize the empire was to heed the advice of the priests. He believed he could command respect from the gods. This is why he killed his children. They were a sacrifice to the desert gods. Before this sacrifice, droughts, disease and famine were spread across the empire. But the very next day, the waters returned, diseases were cured, and food stocks were rising. With this, he brought the empire into a new golden age. However, even during this golden age, Settra was not pleased with what he had done, and so as such, he searched for many ways in which he could become immortal to ensure his lands prospered forever. And with this, he founded the Mortuary Cult. The Mortuary Cult, or Cult of the Dead, are a group of priests that have dedicated their lives to finding the answer to immortality. They would use magic, brew potions, anything that they could to achieve a longer life. And whilst they didn't find an exact way for immortality, they did extend the lifespan of Settra by hundreds of years, and through their studies they found a way in which to preserve bodies after they had died, and this was achieved through precise mummification. And although the priests were capable of extending the life expectancy for a regular man, they did not achieve what Settra had set out to do, and instead of gaining the immortality that Settra so desperately desired, he instead died an old man. However, even though they were not able to give Settra his immortality that he so desperately desired, this did not stop them from trying to achieve their goals. Alongside this, due to Settra's fascination with death and immortality, the culture of the entire empire changed. Over the generations, newer symbols were created to show their respect for the dead. This is why you see a lot of skull and bones across all of the Tomb King's architecture. Alongside this, every king after Settra wanted their pyramid to be greater than their predecessors. This didn't just mean that they wanted it bigger, they wanted to have more grandiose designs to it. And this included the building of giant statues who would guard them in the afterlife. Eventually, these would be known as the necropolises. However, much like how Nehekara entered the Golden Age thanks to the one man, Settra, it would only take one other man to destroy it all. A firstborn son to a king who was meant to serve in the mortuary cult. Nagash was an extremely talented individual. He very quickly ascended to become one of the high priests of Khemri, and even though he was the firstborn son of the king, he was not allowed to rule. Instead, this position was laid to his brother. However, some of the major characteristics of Nagash were his pride, ego, and greed, and so as such he schemed with other high priests in order to overthrow his brother, and in the middle of the night they kidnapped him, burying him alive inside the pyramid. This meant that Nagash became the new High King of the Empire. The Rule of Nagash brought a time of terror. Nagash was an apt pupil in learning dark magic. He learned these acts through shipwrecked Dark Elves that they had taken prisoner, and after countless times of torture of the Dark Elves, he became one of the best wielders of dark magic in the entire world. With the combined effort of his dark magic and his knowledge in the mortuary cults, he started to divulge into necromancy, and every single piece of knowledge that he gained he would write into a book. This eventually led to the 9 books of Nagash. If someone wants to become a necromancer, no matter what books they read, they cannot compare to how high quality the books of Nagash are. And with Nagash's continued studies, he found an elixir that would grant him eternal youth. He gave some to his followers, including his trusted vizier, Arkan. This effectively made them immortal and immensely stronger than a regular human. However, it also made them even more indebted to Nagash. And even though Nagash was ruler and had extreme power, he still wanted more, and so as such he commanded a workforce to build him a new pyramid. And whilst the regular citizens thought it was just another pyramid for him to be entombed in, it was soon found out that this pyramid was much more nefarious than they first thought. Instead of just being a burial chamber, it was intended to be an arcane conduit. This was in order for Nagash to gain more power from the winds of magic. Due to its colour, this pyramid became aptly known as the Black Pyramid, although due to the amount of resources that this pyramid had to be built with, it meant that a large portion of the empire became poverty-stricken, and as such, many of the priest kings started to rebel against Nagash. Utilising the winds of magic and his power of necromancy, Nagash ruled over the dead. His first act was to raise skeleton warriors out of the sands to face the priest kings. No such act had previously been achieved, and as such the priest kings fled in fear. However, even if they decided to stay and fight, if they had died, they would have joined the ranks of Nagash's army. However, as an act of desperation, the mortuary cult enacted a new ritual. In a grand incantation, they summoned heroes from the realm of souls. These souls were bound into statues, which made them come to life. And thus a great battle ensued. Nagash's army of the dead faced against the once inanimate objects. These behemoths strode across the battlefield, wiping out swathes of Nagash's army, and as such Nagash's armies fell. Whilst he did escape, many of his forces, including his trusted advisors, fell. But as Nagash was leaving, he vowed that he would curse the entire kingdom into a land of the dead. For many centuries after Nagash's rule, the priest kings still continued to rule over Nehekara. However, as is common occurrence for these rulers, they still lusted for more power. And so as such, the Queen of Lamia, Neferata, decided to use dark magic in order to extend her lifespan. She knew of this because she acquired one of the 9 books of Nagash. She used the knowledge of the books to create her own elixir of immortality. She was successful in her attempts, however it came at a grave cost. For the gift of immortality, she was cursed with the thirst for mortal blood. She and those that consumed this tainted elixir became the first vampires of the world. And upon this knowledge being learned by the other kings, war was declared against them. And even though a single vampire may have the strength of around 12 men, they could not handle the armies that the kings sent to them. And so as such, the vampires had to flee. But little did they know they were being influenced by another. For hidden to the north of Nehekara, Nagash was utilising his powers to manipulate the vampires. And Nagash made them his new generals for his armies. He and the undead hordes swathed across the land, claiming many lives. And with each life claimed, he gained more soldiers in his armies that he could use to fight Nehekara once again. But this was not enough. Nehekara was just too strong. And as such, Nagash was defeated and the vampires fled across the globe. However, instead of hiding in solitude once again, Nagash came up with a new plan. Instead of defeating his enemy on the field of combat, he would instead defeat them in their own homes. He poisoned rivers and spread plagues across the empire. All of this pestilence killed 90% of Nehekara's population. The streets were littered with corpses as far as the eye could see. And Nagash just walked in uncontested. They walked into Khemri and took the High King and put him into a jail cell to rot for eternity. And Nagash became ruler once more. However, for Nagash, his reign was not long. Nagash had become insane with visions of conquering the entire world with his undead armies. He envisioned a spell that would raise all of the dead across the globe to become his servants. Returning to his Black Pyramid with Warpstone, he began to infuse this spell with new power. As his spell was reaching its conclusion, it drained the life force of anything in Nehekara. Crops withered and animals died, and for those that survived, they aged centuries in the blink of an eye. However, there was one individual other than Nagash who survived, and this was the king who had defeated Nagash on a few occasions. Nagash kept him alive so that he could see the empire fall. However, unbeknownst to Nagash, there was a secret plot to kill him. The king was freed. Strange rat-like creatures that were hunched and hooded freed him and gave him a blade. And the blade that these creatures gave to him was a pure warpstone. The emaciated king stumbled his way over to Nagash, and with Nagash drunk on power, not noticing this king, he was cut down where he stood. But as Nagash lay dying, the energies of his spell did not dissipate. Instead, they flooded across the lands. And with this act, the dead rose. And in the place of the servants that Nagash wanted, the rise of the Tomb Kings began. Previously, any animated corpse had to be controlled by a host. However, now the Tomb Kings are free to do as they wish, like a puppet whose strings have been cut. Both king and servant alike arose from their tombs as nothing but bone, and due to every king being perfectly mummified, their memories remained intact. But the kings came to a stark realization. Where they were once told that they would walk with eternal life in paradise, they instead awoke to find themselves with rotting flesh and ruined cities. And this wasn't a handful of cases. Nehekara over the centuries had hundreds of kings, all of which awakening at the same time and finding themselves in the same situation as the others. But of course, there can only be one king to rule over Nehekara, and each of these kings believed it was their sole right to own it. And these kings wanted to ensure their right to be true ruler over Nehekara. Hundreds of kings and millions of soldiers, the undead legions marched across the sands to face one another. The battles waged on, and the Leash Priest could only look on in horror as Nehekara was going to fall once and for all. However, there was one king that had not awoken during this time, for his pyramid had been covered in seals that protected him from Nagash's spell, and as the Grand Hierophant Katep looked on in horror at what Nehekara had become, he chose to awaken Settra. And as Katep removed the seals, Settra awoke with a fury no other could contend with. Leading his elite tomb guard into the battlefield, he destroyed dozens of kings and legions of undead warriors. For those that did not bow, their bones would be crushed into dust. Even Arkan the Black, Nagash's top vizier, could not withstand the might of Settra, and before long all the Tomb Kings bowed towards Settra, now known as the Imperishable. After being furious with the Leash Priest for not understanding why he had not been given the paradise he was promised, the entire history of Nehekara was explained to him, from how Nagash had obtained immortality, to the spell that caused him to awake. Settra ordered that all Tomb Kings that followed him be put back to sleep for until he needed them. As this task was complete, Settra ruled for over a 1,000 years ensuring his empire was safe. However, this has been a challenge. Nehekara will never be the same as it once was. There has been too much destruction and war to reclaim the empire to its former glory. And so for now, the Tomb Kings only have one other goal in mind. In order to ensure that the utter destruction of Nehekara and the rest of the world is not coming to fruition, Nagash must remain dead. For if not, the title of the Imperishable may be put to the test.